nourishing the mind, body, and soul for the Asian diaspora. Have you eaten? Welcome to Have You Eaten, where we aim to highlight the intricate connections between wellness, mental health, and the multifaceted layers of our diverse Asian diaspora community. And by doing so, we seek to empower, reclaim agency, and reshape narratives. Today, we have Leo, also known as Lowhi, joining us. Lowhi is an alt R&B and lo-fi artist and a mental health advocate and leader doing some amazing work in our community. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to start, I like to ask, how do you identify? So give us your pronouns and give us your, ethnicity, like how you identify.
Sure. So yeah, my name's Leo, aka Lowhi. That's my music artist name. Pronouns are he, him, his. And in terms of ethnicity, I'm Chinese, but I'm this kind of a mix between Chinese American and international because I was born here in the States. Was here till I was 6. Then between 6 to 18, I actually lived in Beijing. But I've been in LA for almost the past 10 years. 10 years now. So
Wow.
I identify heavily with Californian culture, though. I've very much embraced being being a California guy.
Yeah, and we actually met in LA not that long ago,
Yes, we
just a
did.
few months ago. And I just have to say the reason why I wanted you on the show and wanted to have this conversation with you is your energy is amazing. It's very
Thank you.
like there was this like very calming, like very authentic, kind energy that I got from you. We didn't really speak much the first time we met. But I just felt it. And so I knew in the back of my mind, I wanted to have you on as a guest and learn a little bit more about what you were doing. And then when you started talking about the men's group that you lead, and then you performed with Jason, I was like, oh yeah, I want to get to know him a little bit better. And
I appreciate that.
I was lucky enough to
Very
run
kind.
into you again in LA, which I was really excited about.
That's right.
So
That
yeah.
was a fun coincidence as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I'm curious. So you lived here in the States till you were 6 years old, and then you moved to Beijing,
That's right.
which is so interesting to me because I immigrated here when I was 3, and I just it doesn't compute in my head. Like, what would that experience be like coming from this, from here to there? And yeah, like, what was that like?
Yeah, I like to call it reverse culture shock because even though I was born in America, but spent a lot of time in China, obviously. But the school that I went to in Beijing was an international school, much more Western school. So even while I was in China, like the way I dressed, the way I talked, I still speak fluent Mandarin, but there's just different things in the Western versus Eastern education. So, if I were to go into the city, people could clock pretty quickly. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of them, American born Chinese people. So in my imagination as a kid, I always thought that I'd come back to America and then everything would be great. Everyone gets along in America. It's this beautiful, perfect melting pot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in many ways. And it has its issues at the same time. I just put America very much on a pedestal when I was there at that time. So,
Yeah.
coming back and wanting very much to be embraced as American and, having those moments where I was like, whoa, I was not raised here. There's certain things like I missed out on, cultural experiences or just like different cues. So I like to say that I had to relearn how to be American. I feel pretty good about it now, but it was an adjustment period.
Yeah. Well, like when you say that when you were in Beijing and people kind of saw that you weren't born there, like what were some of those key things? Like I went back to Korea when I was 11. And I was a chunky kid at 11. Like I was really chunky and I was really, really dark because I played outside a lot. And, but I spoke Korean and I remember this little girl saying to another little girl, oh, she must be American. She's kind of fat and dark.
Oh my God. Jesus Christ.
And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So what was it for you?
Yeah, I think that's where I learned the difference between like, hey, I can speak the language just fine, but there's a difference between language and culture,
Right.
right? Sometimes like language is a transmitter of culture, but just because I could speak the language fluently, um, doesn't mean I could understand the experiences of someone that say that went to a local school when they were in elementary school. And you can see
Mm-hmm.
the difference, right? Like I had friends in high school where they went to a local school for elementary and then middle school. And then they came to the international school for high school. And I was like, wow, like their Chinese is just obviously so much better. But like just the way they carry themselves, it's just like more
Mm-hmm.
infused with the Chinese culture and tradition. So
Yeah.
yeah, you could just feel the difference. And yeah, like it was this wild thing of wow, even though I do speak fluent Chinese, I'm a Chinese person in China, but I still felt a
Mm-hmm.
sense of like, oh, I'm not Chinese enough, whatever that means.
Right. And then when you came here, like what was the hardest part of kind of getting back into the culture of the United States and
Just looking for where I exactly belonged, because
mm,
I could easily just be like, okay, well, I'm only gonna fit in with people that grew up in the exact same way that I did. But credit to perhaps my outgoingness, I'm able to get along with a wide range of people. And I'll always say, so I went to USC, and I'll always credit a lot of people in the Asian American community there for my sense of self that I have today. Because I remember talking to my kind of mentor at the time. His name's Andy Sue. I remember asking him like, "Hey, I didn't grow up in America. I didn't have the lunchbox moments or like these kind of
mm,
shared trauma moments that a lot of Asian Americans identify with. Am I allowed here? Am
mm,
I valuable here? Can I be a part of this? I so want to be a part of this because this is so beautiful to me." I'll never forget him telling me like, "Of course you're a part of this. You know, you don't need to question that. Like, not only are you a part of this, like we welcome you. We welcome your side of the story of this larger Asian diaspora story. You know,
yeah. What
and
group are you referring to? Was it a men's group or a community that
yeah,
you belong
so
to?
yeah, oh my god, I get to gush about this organization. So it was through the Asian Pacific American Student Services
Mm,
Center at USC, and I'm not sure if they still run it, but it was a program called Circle, and it was basically like an Asian American crash course. It was like an 8-week program where we talk about the intersection of different things with Asian American identity, right? Like, yeah, your sense of identity, gender, sexuality, history, immigration, all these different things. Um, that's where I first learned about Asia, a lot of my Asian American history. And then that culminates in a retreat. So that was a huge part of my college experience. I participated in it. I was a teaching assistant in it. And then my third year, I was a director for it as well.
oh, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, so I think, because they were so welcoming to me, I got to just dive in and be like, how can I contribute? How can I be, the best? How can I be of the best service to this community that embraced me in a way that I didn't expect? So
Yeah.
extremely
Yeah.
grateful, extremely grateful.
I love how you brought up the topic of belonging. Um,
Yeah.
my college experience was very different from yours. I went to a small liberal arts college, a women's only college in New England,
Oh, which
and
one? Which one was it?
Mount Holyoke.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, so it was, I mean, fantastic school, but when I was there, it wasn't as diverse as it probably is now today. So I went early for the BIPOC. They didn't call it BIPOC. I think they called it Students of Color Week.
Mm.
And I was the only student of color on my floor in my dorm.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was very eye opening coming from Orange County, with
Oh, yeah, sure.
predominantly Asian kids. It's a very different experience. So, yeah, belonging was definitely, at the time, the term belonging uh, wasn't really said out loud. But now
Mm.
that I think about it, it definitely was what I was thinking about. And that reminds me, you know, well, I'll get back to that question, but I'm wondering if that group that you were in at USC is what led you to then, take on more leadership opportunities and community groups and the men's group that you run.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the foundation, right? That's the humbling part about doing this work. It's really this feeling of like, oh wow, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the I did for the first time in many years since before the pandemic, an in-person Asian men's support group in mid city LA, and someone that got to attend was this man called Dan Kwong. So when I first started doing Asian men's group work, everyone around me was like, "You got to meet Dan Kwong. You got to meet Dan Kwong." Older, half Chinese, half Japanese man, and he'd been doing Asian men's groups similar to what I'm doing now, like for decades, like out of Santa Monica. So when I first started doing this work, he kind of took me under his wing, like taught me a lot about his style of facilitation, um, continues to teach me things to this day. So yeah, it's like these. It's difficult to imagine sometimes creating something from absolutely nothing, right? Like we're
Mm-hmm.
all, even I can speak as a songwriter too. It's like we're all inspired by those before us. Doesn't make the unique thing that we bring any less valuable. It's just this beautiful celebration of lineage. So in this recent event, to have Dan Kwong in the room, I get goosebumps just thinking about it because I'm like, wow, I got to acknowledge him in front of everyone and tell him how important he was to this work continuing. And then he also said to me, like, thank you for continuing the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we talk about like, what does belonging mean? I think ultimately it's a true sense of like feeling like I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that belonging can happen in many different contexts, in many different forms.
Mm-hmm.
And versus I think sometimes we think about belonging in a limited context, right? Like even this past week in the Asian men's group, we talked about a lot of Asians growing up in the U.S. Well, they want to be white, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to conform to that norm. But we were also talking about like, it's not that we wanted to be white; it's that we wanted to belong,
Mm-hmm.
and so we wanted to feel a sense of validity in our own experience. That we wanted to feel safe and loved, right? It was just
Mm-hmm.
the closest experience for a lot of Asian Americans that, well, whiteness is the vehicle towards that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the beauty of, you see this ecosystem of Asian American mental health these days, whether you're talking about Asian Mental Health Project, Yellow Chair Collective. We're building these alternative paths for Asian Americans to find belonging, right? So it's not about like, oh, let's just tear down the existing structures. It's like, how can we create alternatives that make more sense for us, that show us that, hey, you don't need to go through that path to find what
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for. A lot is available here.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I remember from that event, the Yellow Chair Collective, it was the book celebration of Where I Belong, which I mean, I love that book so much. um, the the thing that was really beautiful about it is all the stories. Everyone was unique and
Mm-hmm.
everyone was different,
Yeah.
and that's the point of even Hello Happy in this conversation and the series that is to show all of our different intricacies and differences, but how we could still belong and be a community even though we're individuals.
Mm-hmm.
um, Okay, so I want to talk about your men's group because
Please.
I have a lot of curiosities around that. I grew up with men in my family not talking about feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, uh, my dad was a Korean military career guy,
Mm.
lieutenant colonel. I mean, he raised me by himself, and I felt many times I was in the Korean army.
Yeah.
Um, and so, we did not talk about feelings whatsoever. And partially why we call this show "Have You Eaten?"
Mm.
also is because that's I think it's uh, people can relate to our families not saying "I love you," "I care about you," but rather "Have you eaten?" "You haven't eaten enough." "Can I
Mm.
get you some food?" Right.
Yeah.
So when I think about your men's group, I am so curious. I wish I could be a fly on the wall because I think honestly that group could heal my stuff from
Mm,
growing up as a female and having Asian men around that didn't talk about their feelings.
sure.
Um, so tell me what your group is like, and you know, is it easier because you guys are all guys in a room talking about it, or yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I think it's a it's a matter of normalization, right? Because like we're all carrying forward behaviors that we've seen from the
Mm-hmm.
people around us, right? So it's this like tidal wave of like, yeah, if all the guys around you aren't expressing emotion or like showing a certain vulnerability or, saying like, yo, like stop crying, don't be a little bitch, right? Don't be a little pussy.
Mm-hmm.
All this type of stuff. Like that's normalized over time, right?
Yeah.
So it takes you think about like, oh, maybe for someone that's 25, they've only experienced this for 25 years, that for 25 years of their life. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
take, it takes time for it to move in the opposite direction. I think the beautiful thing about my men's groups, or in particular the Asian men's group through Asian Mental Health Project, is that I think this is a sign of change where a lot of the men that show up, even the one this past Monday, they're coming at the recommendations of their coaches or therapists,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like these are men that are already doing their own personal work on some level. So this is a space to practice what they're learning in therapy,
Oh, amazing.
in community, right? So and that's the thing. You build this over time. Like we've been doing this in its specific form with Asian Mental Health Project for 2 years now.
Mm.
So over time, it's understanding that trust takes time, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And that's what I got to learn from someone like Dan Kwong is that before any of this work happens, there needs to be the belief that men do want to be connected,
Mm.
that men do want to be vulnerable, that men, even if they don't feel the permission to in their life right now, that once they see the example of what it can look and feel like, that they're going to opt
Mm.
in as well. Right. So
So
it starts with belief.
yeah, and so other than being recommended into or referred into your group, are there people who find you in other ways and join?
Yeah. I mean, that's how I started working with Asian Mental Health Project, because I know they had this huge existing audience of Asian people interested in mental health, both
Mm-hmm.
male, female, non-binary. So I wanted to tap into that, right? So we have a big email list where they started posting about it, and it took off really quickly. Honestly, like even in the beginning, they were already pretty sizable groups of people. Like now it gets up to sometimes even 20 people in the room for these
Mm.
biweekly calls. But even at the start, there were sometimes already at least 10 people. And that's the thing. When I first started this, I think as the organizer, I have this nervousness of like, hey, this might be the day where no one shows up.
Mm.
Everyone decided separately that this wasn't important this week. But thankfully, you have people that are coming over time. And the beauty of community is that it's not just me upholding it,
Mm.
right? I had to set the context more proactively at the start, just to be, hey, I'll be the first to share a really vulnerable story about myself when I felt
Mm.
scared, when I felt stupid, when I felt weak, to set the tone. But now you have guys that understand that context. So a lot of times now, G, when I
Mm.
get in there and like there's new guys in there, other guys that are in there will be like, hey, good to have you, man. Think it's your first time here. How are you doing? I was like, wow, this is a true meaning of community, right? It's not that
Yeah.
you just have this one dictator at the start of it, controlling everything. It's that the values like roll on, not because I'm telling these guys that this is important, but you lead by example and by your
Mm-hmm.
action. And it's not about preaching at guys, hey, you got to be vulnerable, hey, you got to be emotional,
Right.
because it's emotional leadership, right? It's like I'm not
Right.
going to ask these guys to go anywhere or share anything that I'm not sharing myself. that's not fair.
Yeah. And to
Yeah.
your point, everybody has their own journey and they have their own timing,
Yes.
right? Um, and so I was curious, you talked about being in this Asian American group in USC and then this jump into mental health. Like, what was that journey like for you? Like, what happened? If you feel comfortable talking about it, like, what was that
Yeah.
journey between that community to a mental health community?
Yeah. I think something I realized about my life was that it was very segmented. So for the example I bring as a big part of the reason I started the men's group was I had this really close friend in college called Roland.
Mm.
We did everything together, like on the same dance team, party together, everything. But I never told him about my emotional issues, even though we lived in the same place for 2 years, right? When it came down to really emotional things that I was dealing with, whether it was in relationship or like just trying to figure out career and life, I always went to my female friends.
Mm.
And that's a common story I hear among guys. Um, so I started questioning on top of all the Asian American work that I was doing, like, wow, why is that the case? Thinking about, oh, well, I don't have that kind of relationship with my dad, right? I don't talk to him like that.
Mm.
So I was never modeled what it's like for men to share on that level with each other. So even as I started the Asian men's groups, it was also a selfish exploration for me too, right? Like, oh, I want to experience that. I want to see if it's possible. I want to see if maybe other guys are thinking about the same thing as me. And I remember very distinctly. I guess I can give a trigger warning for psychedelics in case that's something you don't want on your platform. You can wipe this section. But I remember being at a rave with a bunch of my college friends, and on Molly, taking substances. And I remember standing at the very back of the group and just feeling like, wow, I'm surrounded by all the people I love in the world. And I feel so lonely.
Mm.
And I feel like even my closest friends don't know really who I am. And it wasn't like a screw them for not knowing me. I look back at it now, I'm like, wow, I didn't even know how to express who I truly was because I wasn't comfortable with who I really was. I
Did
didn't
you
have
know who
this.
you were though?
No, I didn't. I there's a part of me that knew who I was, right? I
Yeah.
knew that there was this part of me that was like, I'm craving connection on a deeper level so badly,
Mm.
yet I don't know how to create it. Like now, after years later, I know that, man, when I'm feeling really lonely, I can call a friend, right? And just say, like, especially, guy friend being like, yo, I'm going through it. You got some time this weekend just to catch up, talk life. I actually did it this past weekend.
Yeah.
My girlfriend's out in China for a week and a half right now. And I was telling the guys in my men's group about it. And my friend afterward was like, hey, are you good this week? You wanna hang out? I know you said it's just you
Mm.
alone, right? But I couldn't have created that if I wasn't honest about how I was feeling. If all my doors
Mm.
are just closed, and there's no room for love to come in.
Oh, I love that phrase so
So
much.
yeah, so that's been a huge part of the journey, learning to open that door for myself, right? So I couldn't.
Mm.
So it's this continual thing of like I'm telling these guys these things in the group, like, hey, reach out for help. It's okay. Like life isn't meant to be done alone. You can lean on your brothers here. But I also need to continue living that.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if there's all this conditioning from my past of like, oh, men got to be hyper independent. You got to figure it out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's still hard. It's still hard for me to make that choice, even after all this practice. So again, this goes back to the beauty of community,
Yeah.
right? Like sometimes it's even hard to ask, but by showing up in,
Mm.
say, my weekly men's group, like we'll notice, right? I'll look at a guy in the face, be like, "What's up? You feel different this week," and that's okay. You know, just tell us
Yeah.
if you need something.
I
Um,
think there's also fear of rejection,
of
right?
course, of course.
Ooh, it's big.
Recently, Dr. K, he's a YouTube creator and therapist. He talks about a big part of men's mental health is something called thwarted belonging.
Mm,
It's where, or whether it's earlier in life or into adulthood, where they make these attempts to find belonging with people, whether it's a friend group, whether it's romantically, whether it's
mm,
professionally, and then they get rejected.
mm, mhm,
So sometimes it's not that they never tried, it's that they had tried and and they just experienced really bad rejection. And then it becomes this cycle of like, well, I don't want to experience the pain of that rejection again. So then I'm not going to reach out. So I'm not going to try to belong next time. And it becomes this downward spiral that feeds in on itself. So that's how I see the nature of my work. It's not to be here to single-handedly solve the male loneliness epidemic, but as different guys in the world, especially Asian guys, they're falling,
mm,
that my space can be one of the different nets that can catch them.
mm,
Right. And that's the beauty
yeah,
of, like, say, the work we're doing right here. And, with YCC, AMHP, also Asian American, like Health Collective, creating spaces, all these different things. That's the beauty of community, is that you have all these different nets where
right,
before there used to be none. Or
right.
before someone in that same situation, they're just free falling.
So, do you ever find yourself in situations where you don't feel that belonging, right? So, okay, I'll get a little vulnerable right now
Mm,
and say, the events that I've met you at, they're Asian American mental health and community events,
mm,
and I transparently forced myself to go to those things
sure.
because I I I am working on my own journey of belonging in those types of spaces. Um,
Wow.
and I sometimes feel that rejection or that
Mm,
I feel the fear. And then, I'm not a shy girl. Like I need to talk to people, right?
yeah.
And and so sometimes the fear of rejection becomes this reality that I feel like it's my
Mm,
reality, whether it's a real reality or my perceived reality, it's my reality. And then I kind of get really sad and upset, but then I keep pushing myself to go again. And it's like that thing that you were saying. It's, you just keep showing up, right? And um, you have to keep showing up and you have to keep showing other people how things are and be there for somebody else who might not feel like they belong, and you
mm,
can be that person for them. But I'm curious though, those times when I'm sure there are people listening or watching today who are like, oh no, I don't want to do that again. Like, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that, and I I completely relate. It's funny, even going to the Creating Spaces event recently, and even though I was like on the campus that I used to be on, I like
Mm,
walked into the room, and this is more my own stuff, right? Of
mhm,
like interesting. Why does my mind wire itself to think that I'm going to be rejected even before none of that has happened?
mhm,
So that's a thought exercise for myself. But I think about it through the lens of curiosity.
mm,
Like, if we've grown up in an environment where people aren't curious about Asian people on that level, right? Like, I think when I think of like racism or like stereotyping, I think about it. It's just where curiosity stops. Well, Chinese
mhm,
people are like this, Korean people are like this, right? And
mhm,
sometimes even between Asian people, we can have our curiosity with each other stop, right?
mhm,
So I think that's really tough, right? To be in a place where it's like, wow, I don't have the energy to be curious about people, but I want them to be curious about me.
mm,
So I think that's why these kind of support group spaces are nice for that, because it's specifically for that purpose.
Mm.
right? To be in a space where everyone's there to be curious about each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's that specific intention of that space. So I would say for people that are experiencing that and know that I experienced that for myself too, that's why I go to these spaces and also facilitate them. It's like that can be our space to fuel up
Mm.
with a lot of love for each other. You know, maybe I tell the guys in my group, sometimes you don't have the energy to be curious today. And that's okay. That's what community is about. We pick each other up when we don't have the
Right.
energy, knowing that, oh, that's going to be given back to me when I need it.
Right. I think
Yeah.
about you're in a relationship, so you might relate to this too, where, when you're in a partnership, it's not 50-50,
Mhm.
right? Like
I
there are
agree.
times, like right now I'm building Hello Happy, and it's very stressful, and there's a lot of support I need from my partner, my husband. And so right now I'll be honest, I think right now in certain, like some cases, in certain things, certain topics, he's 80 and I'm 20,
Mm.
but then there are times in the past where I was 80 and he was 20. And it's just kind of this balancing act, but it's never, I think it's a misconception that everything's always 50-50, and like you're going to give me exactly what I give you. But no, and that's what I hear what you're saying about community is it's holding each other up when we need it, and being that example that we need, right? Later on. So
Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I think a lot of good romantic relationship advice also applies to like friendship
Mm,
as well, or community as well.
mm,
It's like
mhm.
being continually curious about something,
Yeah.
like recognizing that we're all infinitely complex, right?
Yeah.
That the goal of my men's groups always is to make sure each man leaves feeling like they were seen as an individual,
Mm, mm-hmm,
that they can leave them like, okay, the facilitator knows my name. Maybe he
mm,
knows some of my interests too. He knows why I'm here. He knows these details about me,
yeah.
and that's the feedback I get. That's why they come back. It's like I feel
That's
like
awesome.
you know me, right? But
Yeah.
that's my job as a facilitator, is to front load that curiosity
Right.
and trusting that over time they'll give that curiosity not only back to me but the other
Right.
men in the group as well. It's this like flowing well of curiosity, but there needs to be someone that starts that process at some point.
Yeah.
So you
That.
could say that's the burden of leadership. And as you know, starting a company,
Mm,
it takes someone to decide at a certain point, this is what's going to happen.
mm-hmm.
And we're going to do this. Come along with me, help me. So in a similar way with men's group facilitation as well.
Yeah. I think you and I talked about this before in one of our conversations, but Michelle Williams from Destiny's Child,
Mm.
formerly, I heard her speak at a Soul Sisters event. It's this nonprofit out of Oakland that my dear friend started. And she was talking about her relationship with her father and how the shift was growing up. It was like, God, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? And then as she went through her journey, and it got to a point where she then asked, what happened to you? Not
Mm.
what's wrong with you.
Wow.
And that's when you talk about curiosity, that's kind of what comes to mind for me, is this very authentic, curiosity of people, and like what happened to them, right? To be
Yeah.
where they are. Like, why are we afraid to go to these events?
Mhm.
Because we're fearful. Why are we fearful? Like, what happened? Right?
Yeah. I've learned that even as I run these groups, sometimes I'm not curious about myself,
mm,
because I think curiosity extends into compassion as
mm-hmm,
well. Exactly what you're saying. Like for her perhaps, and I have my own version of this, once I became more curious about why someone is the way they are versus
mm-hmm,
like, why are they hurting me? Why are they XYZ? Why
mm-hmm,
are they deficient in a certain way? It's not to perhaps excuse what was done or the amount of pain inflicted, but it's just to understand, perhaps create a
Yeah.
different relationship from
Yeah.
that
You
place.
can have empathy and still be not okay with how you're treated, right?
Yes.
So, but
Yes.
it's a different, it's a, you don't blame yourself for being treated the way you were, but you also then find this peace with empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I was listening to some of your music, and I love taking apart lyrics.
Mm,
So I
let's talk
used to
about
work
it.
at Genius, and I
Yes, that's
saw
right.
when I tried to look for your songs on Genius today, they Jason Chu is your number one. But I was trying to find the lyrics to Trust, and I was Googling it everywhere, and I could not find it. And
I'll get it to you.
I'm infamous for mishearing lyrics. And I mean, my son and my husband will tell you all the time, like, that is not, those aren't not the words to the
That's
song.
funny. Yeah.
So I was listening to Trust over and over again because I'm like, I feel like there's a story behind this song.
Mm,
Um, is there?
yeah. I'd written it. I'd written it for my, well, for and about my girlfriend, where I felt like, she's so loving towards me, and because of certain things in my psyche or my past, I was just unable
Mm,
to receive it.
mm,
And I think that's what I talk to my guys, or talk to the men in my men's group sometimes. It's like, hey, is there truly no love around you, or are you blocking off some of that love from
mm.
reaching you, from
Oh,
reaching
that's
your
deep.
heart? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because then if I don't receive that love, then of course I'm depleted, and then my girlfriend's depleted too, because she's giving and she's not seeing that love like actually
Mm-hmm.
nourish me. So the songs about that, like, wow, I'm afraid to trust. I'm afraid that, I think, in terms of like men and masculinity too, sometimes that's why we don't open up as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, going back to thwarted belonging, the sense of, if you really knew me and all that I am, all the messed up
Mm-hmm.
parts of me too, then everyone would leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I continue this mask of, yeah, I'm strong. No, 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 yeah, I'm good. Because we fear the alternative is total loss of
Yeah.
love. So I'd rather hold on to the shred of love that I can find by putting on certain masculine masks, because that's better than losing everything. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit about of what the song's about.
Shit. That was exactly what I talked to my therapist about today.
Okay, let's talk about it.
There's this theme that you talk about of, you said a phrase earlier today, where you said, you have to have the door open in order to receive. And a lot of us, out of fear, we close that door.
Yeah,
And I am not a stranger to that. And so, yeah, I mean, the couple of lines that I did pick up from the song, I think I said it to you earlier, but glimpse into my past, save myself. And so I'm like, there's a story. There's something, there's.
yeah, that line, if you took a glimpse into my past, you'd run.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could someone know all of me and stay?
Mm,
To have that belief, like, taking over everything, yeah,
yeah.
it's very difficult to create sustainable love.
Yeah.
There's no flow of it. It's stuck. It's stuck somewhere.
But you know what's beautiful about just being open and authentic and like these types of conversations is that it's one, like, showing people that they can do this, and people aren't gonna, I mean, I haven't shut off my computer and ran away, right? But
Yeah,
at this, and also it's the practice of self-love. And it's the practice of, if I love myself enough, and all this crap that happened formed who I am. And if it wasn't for all that crap, like, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And anyone who can't accept that, then do they deserve to be in our present?
sure. And I want to speak into that about self-love too. Sometimes I think there's this misconception that our development of self-love has to happen in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I got to go into my cave, my dark cave,
Mm-hmm.
get my self-love game up, and then come out a perfect person that doesn't need to be vulnerable anymore because I have self-love. I'm like, no, I don't think that's true. Sometimes being in a good community of well-meaning people,
Yeah.
you can see reflections of yourself through them that
Yeah.
aids in your self-love process. Right?
Yeah.
I see that happen in my men's groups all the time, where some of the most powerful moments was you just look a guy in the eye and say, like, hey, you're a really good guy. I don't know if you've ever had anyone tell that to you.
Mm.
You're kind, you're strong, you listen, you're ambitious, right? Some of the most powerful moments in the men's groups, even in this past Monday, we were talking overall about how, like, sometimes men don't get real compliments until their funeral. They don't get their flowers till their funerals. So I'm like, okay, if that's the case, let's give each other our flowers right now, even if you're strangers. Just take a moment to type something to a guy in the Zoom room right now.
Mm.
Tell him how dope he is. Tell him the impact that he made on you, even if it was a small one.
Let's take this moment to give some flowers to someone.
Sure.
Like, who would you give flowers to right now?
Sure. Since you know him, this is a perfect time to talk about him. Jason Chu. He's been a mentor, brother, collaborator to me the past few years, or many years actually. But I feel like as I've been starting my own business recently through this men's support group work, I've learned a ton from him. Right? He's been the one to remind me in tough moments, right, where I don't know what the right decision is to make. He's like, hey, this is an opportunity to live into your values, to walk the talk of what you're talking about. I know it's hard. This is your chance. So yeah, gotta give my flowers to that man. Yeah, especially recently, these past few months. Challenging moments where he was like, hey, I know it's challenging. It's an opportunity to live your values. That's something I think about.
That's awesome. You actually do a show, I think, on social with Jason too, right? Oh, I see you in his videos quite often.
Oh yeah, we make content together. So
yeah. Well, where our time is wrapping up, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to give a shout out to your handle, and where, like, how can someone become involved in these groups that you're leading?
Yeah, so you can find me at Lowhi Official. That's LOWHI Official. And a couple things we have going on is there's a free biweekly Asian men's group that's hosted under Asian Mental Health Project. So you can go to their IG and find the sign up link. It's under my link in bio as well. I run a weekly men's group that's for men of all backgrounds, not just Asian. So you can find that link to sign up in my link in bio as well. Let me see. And we've recently locked date on another in-person Asian men's group on May 25th in LA. So soon to have information coming out about that. So if you're local to LA area, or if you're willing to travel to come join us for that, I'm really excited for it. Going to be bringing in some really good people to make it a space for us as Asian men to recharge and reflect with each other.
Amazing.
So that's all for me.
So make sure you follow Lowhi, and also once we get more information about that event, we'll help promote it and post it on our socials and our website. Our website, which is we're filming this before our website is live, but it will be up by that point. Awesome. In May, so it'll be perfect timing. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today and making this conversation so easy.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah, and Yeah, until next time, this is G with Hello Happy, and where I ask people, have you eaten? Hello, Happy Fam. Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. And until next time, I hope your bellies and your hearts stay full.